there are online communities. Links to these online communities are spread virally through private messages and emails. Links are spread from person to person, at work, at home, at a local bar, at the local store. Each online community chooses a target and makes that person's life hell through relentless harassment, systematic character assassination, and much more. Society gets stuck, however, on this question of why otherwise ordinary, upstanding, principled citizens would engage in such cruel, or dare we say, evil behavior. I like to point out that there are existing, acknowledged forms of abuse which form a part of what I'm experiencing. Things such as bullying, workplace mobbing, relational aggression in general, narcissistic abuse, coercive control. All of these can be easily looked up online. What's interesting is no one claims any of those are conspiracy theories, nor that their victims are paranoid. Wouldn't it be a matter of course, wouldn't it be natural for the same personality types who perpetrate the above to simply bring the same behaviors, the same motivations to the internet, a place where they can procure an exponentially greater amount of the constant validation and human suffering they subsist on in the first place? It strikes me as odd that any reasonable student of human nature would rule out such a possibility so vehemently, almost over-enthusiastically. After all, what we're talking about is just people being people, the same people they've always been throughout history. All we're doing here is adding social media, smartphones, and a little anti-terror tech loaned by intelligence agencies. The rest is already there. Next, I'd like to attempt to go beyond what is happening and look at why it's happening. That is, the purposes these covert groups serve. I do so at a tremendous disadvantage in that perpetrators make use of memes and symbols which communicate with their audience on an emotional or gut level, whereas I can only plod along making moral arguments like some professor in a class where everyone's asleep. Presentation is critical, entertainment value is critical, and in both cases, my abusers have the advantage. Furthermore, the ideas and information which I need to discuss do not make people feel good or comfortable. The desire to and the tendency toward wanting to feel good, and not just in the physical sense but in the psychological, is a driving force in human society. And here I am asking people to go against that just to hear me speak. So I've decided to use analogies and conceptualizations to help you understand what targets are going through and what it means for the world at large. What if I only had one chance to explain what's going on, in one short video to do it, and using one word or concept as a starting point? Well, I would choose the word mistreatment. Once again, the word would be mistreatment. You take a human being, you point technology at that human being, you give the technology to a group of citizens. The group created expressly for this purpose subjects the chosen human being to extreme mistreatment that is inescapable and gets worse over time. And you broadcast it all online, invite only. So what happens next? This new pastime goes viral. Folks from all walks of life flock to watch the action, or even join the group to get their chance to personally torment somebody and get away with it. But wait, there's something wrong here. Accepted wisdom has it that only 1% of the population should be capable of engaging in such behavior. Yet a clearly higher percentage than we would like to believe can and will do so without hesitation. Are we so presumptuous as to think our brain structure is fundamentally different from those who sat in the cheap seats at the Colosseum? Now, just to make sure all bases are covered, the group uses that age-old method of piling up as much dirt on the target as possible. Over time, whenever the cruel thrills are in danger of pushing levels of cognitive dissonance too high for comfort, all that is needed is to pile on more secret incidents to achieve relief. But what about the rest of society? What is its reaction? Upon getting sat down at the computer and introduced to the targeting system by participating friends, family members, neighbors, and co-workers, bystanders' shock is beyond words. And what happens is again the opposite of what we want to believe. For there is no outrage. There is no recognition of coming face to face with something we've been bred to be prepared to resist. Alas, nothing of the kind. After the initial shock, people are overwhelmed by a sense of relief, of safety from danger, of being fortunate to have been spared such a fate. But what also comes welling up in them, shattering the self-idealizing myths so typical to Western democracy, is a deep feeling of gratitude to the perpetrators, to the very perpetrators, a willingness to serve them, to keep the secret, to look the other way. Common sense, never the moral force that some would have you believe it is, pays a visit to dictate that the best course of action is to allow victims to be secretly and preferably repeatedly accused, or best of all, labeled as crazy. As wrong as that may be, it's the easiest way to hold on to one's identity for those whose world has just changed in an instant. And so for most, the battle against all we have been taught to be on guard against is fought and is then over in that same instant, simply by having been made a witness to the extreme mistreatment of an individual with inescapable technology by an army of citizens that has members in every town and city. It turns out that the golden rule is real, and it possesses massive inherent power that can be exploited for evil. The above, by the way, is the essence of psychological warfare. Targets like me just play a role in it, in a secret, viral, social media war. We are the ones called targets, it is true, but in reality, we're just being used by an operation whose actual target is society itself. The objective, large-scale influence and control. If there are thousands of covert harassment operations like mine, what does it all add up to? And what do we call that? Confusion over what it really is, and even the lack of language to describe it, puts the perpetrators in the position to both define the terms and control the narrative. So I offer you my attempt at a clunky yet encompassing enough term. Crowdsourced, gamified totalitarianism. Crowdsourced, gamified totalitarianism. So, why crowdsourced totalitarianism? A government agency, were it to be publicly identified as engaging in such, would spark outrage. Protesters would converge on the spot and demand its dismantlement. But crowdsourcing breaks it up into hundreds of thousands of pieces and scatters them across the face of the earth, making it easier to hide or outright deny. The irony is, the civilian volunteers who make up 99% of the ranks would be among the protesters were the same duties performed exclusively by government employees. When you crowdsource and power share, people feel very differently about the erosion of our rights, evidently. The rest of society then lets its guard down upon seeing its good sons and daughters as willing participants. There's also a certain amount of compartmentalization, so that, for example, members of one operation are not necessarily aware of other operations or the big picture, or it's likely that they don't care or don't want to know. We can see the same effect as well of compartmentalization within a single operation, with members once again either not knowing the connection to the big picture or not wanting to know. All right, then, why gamify totalitarianism? In order for it to not be rejected by the population, participation levels have to be very high. There are simply not enough criminals and informants to fill out its ranks, so a large number of ordinary people are required. Through gamification, entire families can be recruited and seemingly tricked into accepting the surveillance state and that some people in it exist just to be hunted. You addict participants with psychological payoffs and social benefits, the most noteworthy of which is protection from the criminal system itself. Gamification also helps to take the edge off of or to disguise the inhumane treatment that targets the fuel of the system have to be put through every day. It's pretty crazy how you can take the very same people who would be outraged at what you created and would be on social media denouncing you, and you can make them into the most aggressive guard dogs of your new system simply by crowdsourcing and gamifying. There's no change in values or morals here. I'm not sure we as a society have been prepared to face something like this, perhaps because we automatically associate democratization with what is good and beneficial without realizing that what is bad and harmful, or an evil system of control, can also be democratized to some extent. And what we're dealing with here is the foundation of what amounts to a new class system. We've been brought up to be on the lookout for what I call Raiders of the Lost Ark Nazis, that is, obvious fascism in obvious shapes and forms. But those who seek that kind of power and control are always evolving their methods and especially their appearances. So other forms of authoritarianism have been pretty much ignored by all of us, allowing these people to slowly conquer society from within. The architects of this slow-motion revolution, taking decades, knew their history. They knew their mob psychology. They were clearly impressed by the level of control achieved by certain regimes, but they knew that to continue along that path, they could never make the mistake of giving their movement a public name, uniforms, or publicly identifiable leadership. I bring you this far only to have to inform you that I could have just used the word Big Brother, but I resisted because the general public's conception does not include the aspects just discussed and only elicits in us mental images of some elite network. But Big Brother, it turns out, works by including and being made up of largely normal people. Back on the subject of a Big Brother and how it could even happen here or be implemented, what if you designed a control system based on, of all things, the social dynamics of a 7th grade classroom? Think back to an environment where you had to fight for social survival or to simply be ignored and left alone. Those who stood out or fell somewhere in between would get preyed on. Now, imagine adults in a scheme fighting for social survival or to be ignored by the now grown-up bullies, who in this case are predators who have been deputized and given technology to do as they see fit to impress and entertain each other. I call it the cool kids authoritarian paradigm, and believe it or not, there have been many times when conceiving of the system in these terms has helped me to understand my abuser's behavior. and to understand, for example, why bystanders will not intervene. Everyone's just fighting to survive or fighting to be ignored. It's amazing that it's exactly like kids in a school. All right, next, conceptualization, or another way to understand this complex social problem. Think of it as a kind of inner CAC therapy, which connects people with more tribal states of mind through socially sanctioned lawlessness. Imagine if people were given permission to run around engaging in constant acts of terror and sabotage against private citizens, under full protection of the authorities and with zero negative impact on their identity or reputations. Leaving aside who we think we are as a society, what would people get out of this therapy? It's an opportunity to release negative energy, to act on desires and appetites which civil society requires us to suppress, to experience deep bonding through defeating a symbolic threat or enemy, to increase social status, to connect with a greater source, to feel a sense of strength, energy, and purpose. Simply put, being unleashed upon a selected underclass makes people from all walks of life feel amazing for short periods of time. You see, the therapy, so to speak, comes at a price, in that a person must literally lose all rights and become fodder. The dehumanization that's required to allow normal folks to enjoy these benefits is often life-destroying for the target. The surveillance state gains from all of this as well, in that they can build loyalty by providing this service to the population, while also fostering greater obedience and conformity through the weaponized mobs it commands. Finally, giving license to members to act out in these ways has the effect of pacifying them. As a target, I've observed many dark sides of this therapy. Here are 4 of the main ones. The ability for these people to go out and do this to others soon becomes a precious right to them, far more precious than the human and civil rights we're supposed to believe in. And continued access to the target is something participants will aggressively fight for using increasingly nefarious means. 2. As participants get sucked in deeper and deeper, in their minds, what they're doing gets transformed from rights violations into a heroic struggle against tyranny, even though they are now technically agents of oppression meant to protect the high-tech criminal mafia from threats. This in particular is something I never would have believed possible in this time and place if it were not actually happening. 3. It is behavior straight out of the worst episodes of history, carried out by the very folks who should know better than anyone else. 4. The single most disturbing insight this behavior teaches us is something few are able to face, that our modern progressive citizens nonetheless have secret desires to possess an underclass created specifically to terrorize, abuse, blame, and to help make themselves feel less powerless and miserable. This should be impossible based on who we are, but is somehow possible thanks to several factors, including the secrecy and the fact that this underclass, built on a case-by-case basis, flies under social justice radar. Part 8. Smart or designer abuse. Creating the perfect crime by exploiting flaws in human nature, quirks of crowd psychology, and reverse engineering the bystander effect. Smart predators know that appearance is king, and there are zones or pockets which, if you can maneuver your victims into, bystanders will side with you, the aggressor, regardless of how great the wrongs you commit are. So how do you get victims into the pocket or zone? By pushing them into the anything negative category, by making them appear sad, pathetic, weak, angry, crazy, unhinged, out of control, unpleasant, dangerous, all manner of politically incorrect, or if all else fails, just ridiculous will do. This tactic is almost magical in its effectiveness. Once again, had I not witnessed this so many times myself, I would never believe it. As for why bystanders are tricked by this, factors I've been able to identify include fear of being targeted, desire to get along in the social environment without conflict, and this is especially true in workplace mobbing, and most surprisingly, the behavior of malignant narcissists actually elicits admiration and respect, as well as providing people with welcome entertainment. What we've just described is essentially what narcissistic abuse is all about, but with the technology available to covert harassment groups, this technique becomes all the more formidable, and in the zone or in the pocket moments can be compiled online to be used against the victim for life, so that when the ringleaders feel they're losing bystander or neutral actor support, they can simply repost and thereby signal straight into the targeted audience's brains. I've noticed that this is especially common when they're trying to distract from a recent adroit deception or act, or when the abuse is particularly cruel. The end result is, if an abuse system is designed smart or well enough, perpetrators are able to get away with shocking acts of sustained cruelty that inflict maximum trauma on victims, all while bystanders are busy commenting on how unhappy or ungrateful victims are, in sentences peppered with innuendos about secret accusations that are hidden from the same victims. Part 9. The Boomtown, or Target as a Resource. A resource is discovered. A boomtown springs up around it to exploit that resource in various ways. But what if that resource is a person, and the boomtown is an online community which springs up around him or her that benefits from the exploitation in a multitude of ways? As to what makes a person a resource, I've been able to determine that it's their pain and suffering caused by the extreme mistreatment that is bottled up and used as a kind of energy to feed the community, but back to that later. Think of the boomtown as a kind of social ecosystem with niches that are filled by different archetypes. There is the social power and influence of its government, the influencers, the opinion leaders, the online personalities, the pundits, the jokesters who use the victim to get likes and notoriety, the stalkers, the harassers, the remote abusers who are there to get personal satisfaction from harming someone or to enjoy the respect and social status it brings when it's all broadcast online. The false accusers who are drawn in by this too tempting shortcut to all of the validation and love that they crave. The setup artists who enjoy creating chaos or manipulating crowds. The opportunist motivated by greed or a desire to cover up a dark past. And over all of that, you have vast online crowds driving it all simply because they want entertaining content. They love the drama and the intrigue of it all. However, the online community or the boomtown always faces a fundamental problem. Besides the illegal and inhumane treatment they subject their resource to. You see, the resource they're all addicted to, that they all depend on, has to be suffering and in pain. That's what creates the synergy where they can all continue to benefit. So when that energy dries up because the victim is ignoring the abuse or moving on with his or her life, the boomtown, a 24/7 online party, starts to fall apart. So in a desperate effort to hold on to power for the ringleaders, the respect for the foot soldiers, the validation for the false accusers, the audience for the two-bit Bill O'Reillys they attract, and for the online population for whom this is a spectator sport. This simply cannot be allowed to happen. It's human nature not to give up what benefits or pleases us, especially in areas where there's no moral authority to step in. To protect the flow, therefore, pressure is applied to the victim in forms of intensified abuse, accompanied by new online character attacks, incidents that are staged, etc., all to keep the precious substance flowing. What you may or may not realize is just how much of the character assassination you've become familiar with over the years was actually created because of this desire for them to hold on to their power, entertainment, benefits, etc. Philip Zimbardo's Stanford Prison Experiment took a group of people and made some prisoners and some prison guards. Needless to say, it had to be shut down after about 2 weeks because of the increasingly aggressive behavior of the guards, even though they weren't even real guards. Stanley Milgram's Obedience to Authority. Milgram set out to better understand what had happened in Europe by determining what percentage of citizens would follow orders and knowingly administer torture on others. Milgram's colleagues, the learned men of psychology, predicted the number would be as low as 1%. The experiment, carried out in nearby New Haven and Bridgeport, astonished everyone with a much higher percentage. All I'm saying is, what if a group of people with resources and surveillance technology decided to use the above as a model to create a nationwide open-air experiment by deputizing thousands of cowboys to police the block and thousands more to eagerly administer torture? By the way, a couple years ago I found something interesting in the cited sources of a declassified Army document related to PSYOPs. And what did I see listed there? The Milgram experiment, obedience to authority. Well, if you've listened this far, I really appreciate it. In the next section of this video letter, I'd like to focus on the aspects of life as a target which I most wish, even to the point of anguish, bystanders, including all of you, could understand. These are the things I've really wanted to be able to talk about and explain in person, but have not been able to due to the rather unusual circumstances. First, I need to explain this claim that targets are being tortured. How is it torture exactly? Consider this 3-point definition. This form of torture is mistreatment such as criminal abuse and rights violations. That is, 1. Relentless, inescapable, and increasingly invasive and cruel over time. 2. That is evolved and adapted for maximum effectiveness through real-time monitoring of brain activity. And 3. That is paired with trauma. We experience 24/7 stalking and harassment, vehicular and on foot, mobbing in public and in workplaces, verbal and psychological abuse, hate crimes and discrimination, staged incidents, impersonation, character assassination, cyber stalking and hacking, identity and property theft, trespassing, break-ins, vehicle and property damage, sonic attacks, sleep deprivation, non-consensual human experimentation, etc. It's worth noting, believe it or not, one can get used to and live with all the above, but what ties it all together and makes it torture more than anything is trauma. So I want to make one more attempt at a definition or description of this form of torture with this in mind. You wake up one day to find yourself being stalked and harassed, and all the above listed 24/7. All based on secret accusations you're never allowed to see or defend yourself against. No one will intervene or help you. Society around you comes to accept what's happening as normal, as justified, and even as entertaining. Buoyed by this and new secret incidents every year of the rest of your life, the mistreatment gets worse and worse. As time passes, you come to be dehumanized so much that you reach the point where any detail about you or your life, anything you do, say, think, or feel, becomes automatic confirmation in the minds of those around you of what has already long since been decided extrajudicially. It's a true nightmare scenario. A victim of covert harassment develops complex trauma as a result of the sheer scale, duration, and intensity of the operation targeting him or her. I've tried to come up with a partial list of contributing elements or stressors, a trauma recipe, if you will. But I wonder if in doing so, I'm not creating a guide for people to trigger me with. Yet, it has to be done, and it's actually inevitable. You see, were I to write it all down one day for the catharsis alone, or take a long walk with the voice recorder running and just talk it all out, every word would be intercepted with tech, shared on the community's private pages, deconstructed, mined, and incorporated into the daily abuse regime. In fact, phrases and concepts from every part of this video letter so far have already showed up during sleep deprivation. Complex trauma, elements and stressors. 1. First and foremost, psychological violence is violence. Technological violence is violence. But unfortunately, in our culture, this exists in a gray area, and neither is recognized as such. Predators are drawn to covert harassment for this very reason, delighting at the opportunity to pour so much methodical malice into attacks on a victim's life, even to the point of thinking and acting like serial killers, and all with no harm done to their reputations or to the esteem they're held in by family and friends. It's no wonder this is turning into the unofficial national pastime. 2. An entire language of abuse is created between the group and its victim. One word, movement, gesture, symbol, and all associated emotional and physiological effects at a time. Each unit gets charged with layers of meaning over months and years, and can become able to deliver deep wounds to the psyche. Sometimes I call this emotional cluster bombing because of all the levels this type of messaging can hit you on. 3. It's the pervasiveness and inescapability of it. The very environment around you is permeated to the point where you're constantly reminded of the abuse and abused by that in turn. 4. How indescribably violating it is, in that there are zero boundaries and no human being around you recognizes any. As each intensification is ordered, it is carried out gleefully with no human regard for you. Quite simply, it's raping a person's mind and body with technology and harassment over and over. It makes you realize no wonder dehumanization of targets has to be so thorough. 5. Many drops of water form a lake. The saying goes. We are often ridiculed when attempting to describe the individual drops, but they can come together with great psychological impact. One drop is a nuisance, a few drops are a nuisance, but the lake can swallow you up, and that's by design. So the whole can be broken down and denied whenever necessary. Six, it's all based on secret information. Now, how is that related to trauma? Anyone has the ability at any time to go to the online community and accuse me. Despite the downplaying to the contrary, secret convictions in online opinion courts can have equal or greater force than official convictions because they can be modified, rescinded altogether, and then brought back later to go through further modifications as needed, a clear violation of our Sixth Amendment rights and due process. Using this information as a pretext, anyone is now empowered to prey on me with stalking, harassment, and remote means, all hate crimes. It's become common practice as well that when I denounce such predators, even privately, they go straight online to post new accusations of their own, and I'm simply told there are two sides to every story, despite the fact that the other side is hidden from me. I don't know if people realize what a dangerous precedent this practice sets and what the implications are for us all. Bystanders play a key role in all of this. Each of them takes the time to go online to watch the community's presentation and invariably comes to the conclusion that I don't need to defend myself, don't have a right, or don't deserve to. What it ends up feeling like is a kind of secret parole hearing where the decision keeps coming back, punishment extended indefinitely, reason classified. This amounts to holding a citizen in a situation of torture based on secret information, something that should not be happening here and now. Add to this the gaslighting, denial, and victim blaming. That is, I'm told either it shouldn't bother me, that I'm crazy and need help, or that I'm asking for it. Reason, once again, classified. Keep in mind as well that what qualifies as an accusation or the definition of a punishable offense under this extrajudicial system gets broadened and broadened over time to include just about anything the community wants it to be in a given moment. Thus, in 2019, we find ourselves in a dystopia with a version of thought crimes far exceeding previous imaginings. Seven, the abuse is adaptive in nature, and abusers can make adjustments in real time based on my brain activity, which effectively blocks most of the normal coping mechanisms and paths to healing, thus compounding the trauma. As previously mentioned, journaling, a long walk with one's thoughts, a heart-to-heart conversation can all trigger instant retaliations. Privacy really does matter. 8. There is a technique I call mining, where they use the tech to search your mind for any positive associations. It might be a strain of music that you heard that morning. It might be the way somebody pronounces a word that you like, and that will immediately get added to the psychological torture. 9. PTSD and re-victimization. Due to the high-tech nature of this, symptoms of PTSD like hypervigilance, irritability, and even inner anger are all posted online for the community to see and are treated like crimes, like reasons why, by the group members. Imagine a form of psychological torture so invasive that you feel like you can barely catch your breath in your own mind, and to have the side effects of months or years of that used against you as justification for doing it in the first place. It's truly inhumane treatment. 10. Isolation that goes beyond the shunning and constant sabotaging of human relationships by this essentially ultimate form of peer pressure. This is a form of loneliness far more painful when the group controls perception of you so completely that everyone around you doesn't even try to perceive you anymore, but has learned to wait for the next post on their phones to tell them who you are and what you are, to tell them what to say, think, or feel about you, when everything you do and say is met with nothing but scorn, and mistrust, and you can't relax and be yourself with anyone that's participating. It's a form of tyranny that aims to rob a human being of their very identity and self. (11) The cycle. Believe it or not, one can get used to the daily barrage to a certain extent, but it's the cyclical nature of it that makes you let your guard down time and time again. You think, it's slowing down, I'm going to get back on track, and just when you're stabilizing, the campaign heats up again, and the online crowd rallies. I find that a lot of the trauma is inflicted during these times when the cycle flips. 12. 3 positions. There is a kind of Orwellian doublethink at work, likely because the covert harassment groups remain unopposed and develop a cult-like mentality after so many years of getting away with their crimes. What I mean is, the group's reality is constantly in flux between 3 basic positions: outrage, ridicule, and denial. You'll wake up one night to find an attack has started because somebody posted a malicious false complaint. Another day, months later, you'll wake up to a similar attack because it turned out that that complaint was false, and this time, what's the abuse for? Because you're pathetic and you let it bother you. Sometime later, you'll wake up on another night to yet another attack, and this time it's because you're paranoid or crazy or just because. I must say, this makes one's ordeal as a target seem all the more wanton and senseless. 13. A game. After a while, you realize that you're being monitored to the point where your tormentors will stage incidents at will or call in complaints just as a part of some sick chess game. They never really consider that by getting a new job, finding a new hobby, or trying to find ways to cope with this 24/7 onslaught, you're not attacking them and it's not a strategy. Nevertheless, they feel the need to answer back. Sometimes it's shocking what people will do to someone else's life just to get a sense of victory or a few hours of satisfaction.